Hello everyone. Today I will be finally featuring the Tier 10 Pan-Asian destroyer, the Yueyang. The matchmaking is, well, a lot of Tier 10s, double Minotaur, Missouri, 3DDs that are Tier 10 and 9 as well. Not really the best matchmaking, but not really the worst either. Pretty average, I would say. I will be comparing this ship very heavily to the gearing because it plays very similarly to the gearing, and honestly it reminds us all quite a lot of the gearing. I know it's a different ship type and blah 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 blah, whatever, it still plays just like a gearing. First things first, you might notice that this ship has 22k health. The gearing with survivability expert has 22.9, so the gearing has a 900 health advantage here. I will mention that I will be comparing this using 19-point captains. This is tier 10 ship, so you should be running high level captains on them. I mean, remove RPF and it's a 15-point captain in terms of combat effectiveness. But the comparisons will be made using full specs and so forth instead of just using the base stats, since those are probably the most important values for people. First thing I do here is push into the cap and try to secure it. The Yueyang actually has a concealment advantage over the gearing. While the gearing has 5.9 sea detection and 3.5 air detection, the Yueyang has 5.8 and 3.4. So small difference, 100 meters advantage on both sides. Not really that big, but an advantage is still an advantage. Also worth noting is that the gearing smoke firing penalty is 2.8, while the Yueyang has a 2.6, so a 200 meter advantage there as well. Now, smoke concealment will rarely be that much of an issue unless someone is rushing you, but in those situations it's of course fantastic. Krosse Korfust has no idea deepwater torps are coming his way, and he's eating a bunch of them. He damage con torps he ate earlier, so because the damage con was still active, I didn't get any floodings, but he still ate 50k worth of damage as I secured the cap. Now, maneuverability wise, the Yueyang actually takes the crown in all parameters, I think. I'm pretty sure it beats it at everything. It does 38.3 knots with a speed flag, which is 0.5 more than the gearing with a speed flag. It also has a 20 meter tighter turning circle and a 0.2 seconds faster rudder shift. Now these differences are of course extremely small, and honestly you're not likely to really notice them, because you're not going to notice a 20 meter tighter turning circle as you're playing the ship, but the fact that they are better is something that must be highlighted. And of course worth mentioning is also you will in general be faster on the map with the Yueyang, because of course you'll be running speed boost. That is because you can't slot defensive AA, but that's something I'll return to later, but that's something I consider of course a big disadvantage. What I have to mention is, even though the gearing has a 900 health advantage, I'm pretty sure the Yueyang has significantly better survivability. And the reason for that is that the ship actually sits significantly lower in the water than the gearing. When I compared them in port, I was actually surprised at how big the difference was. I will show you at the end of this commentary, before I show you guys my recommended build, I will show you the difference in how high these ships sit in the water. But honestly, the Yueyang pretty much shows half less hull than the gearing does. It sits very low in the water, and this of course makes it a smaller target, less area to hit and so forth, which on a DD is highly valuable. So I think that the Yueyang more than makes up for that 900 health with the significantly lower hull. And the AA values, well, I might as well return to them now. They are pretty much identical across the board. I think the gearing has very slightly better short range AA, but ultimately what it comes down to is the fact that the gearing can slot defensive AA, the Yueyang cannot. And that is something I consider a huge disadvantage. Not just because carrier strikes, carrier strikes against you and teammates, the gearing is actually really good at defending against those, because the guns that they both share are of course dual purpose, meaning they can shoot both air and sea. So defensive AA is actually quite strong on a gearing. So not having that is, in my opinion, a big disadvantage. Also, of course, it does not just for killing like carrier planes, but also if you're hiding behind an island or whatever and a spotter plane, fighter plane, whatever spots you, in the gearing you can pop defensive AA to burst it down, like get this huge damage increase and quickly burst down the plane to get undetected, whereas the Yueyang you kind of struggle and hope that, well, you eventually shoot it down. So that's obviously a downside. The torps, extremely similar. Same range, same damage, same reload. No, actually, sorry, not same range. Same damage, and same reload, but the range is shorter. The gearing has 16.5, you have 13.5. So that's a 3 kilometer advantage in favor of the gearing. In return, you have 2 knots faster, which is, well, not really that good of a trade-off for 3 kilometers. But more importantly, of course, is that these are deep water torpedoes, which means that while the gearing torps have a concealment of 1.4, you have a concealment of 0.8. And 0.8 concealment on torps is of course amazing, and that's why you see me land so many of these torps on these battleships, because, well, they don't really have any time to react. And in fact, I think someone made a calculation that once you spot these torpedoes, you have a 4.5 second reaction time. Upon spotting the torps, you have 4.5 seconds to evade before they hit. So most ships don't even have a rudder shift of 4.5 seconds. So for the battleships, they don't really have any time to react or do anything before they hit by the torps. Another thing that this of course made me consider was torpedo acceleration, but ultimately running torpedo acceleration reduces this reaction time from around 4.5 seconds to 4 seconds. So that's half a second. You're giving up 20% range for half a second of less reaction time. And on the torps that already have such good speed and all this, I consider that to be completely unnecessary, and torpedo acceleration simply is not worth it. Now, that's not to say that torpedo acceleration wouldn't be quite valuable if your torps are spotted. If you're torping someone that is running Hydra, for example, or you got planes above you and you need to torp, then torpedo acceleration is of course valuable, since even if they see them coming, they still have to dodge them, and speed is very useful there. But in 9 times out of 10, or even maybe 19 times out of 20, torpedo acceleration will be a waste on the Yueyang. So you saw, of course, the Missouri, once again, 8 torps, and that's something that you will if you torp battleships, you tend to quite consistently get hits. So the Yueyang is very good at landing these torpedoes, thanks to, of course, all these values. Another thing, though, which makes TA, a torpedo acceleration, less valuable is, well, usually when you run torpedo acceleration, you also want to be torping DDs, because you got such fast torps, and the faster the torps are, the better they are at hitting DDs. But of course, these are deep water torps, which means you are completely incapable of hitting torps at all. The guns, as you can see, this is standard gearing gun power here, 3x2, 127 mils, exactly identical gun parameters. They both have a 3-second base reload. They both have the same HE alpha, AP alpha, I think 1.8k HE. They both have the same fire chance of 5%. So completely identical across the board. The firing angles seem extremely similar as well. I don't know if they're different. I haven't really paid attention because they feel so very identical. The Yueyang actually does have a range advantage though. It can shoot to 11.9, whereas the gearing can only shoot to 11.1. And 11.1 starts actually to be a bit limiting. So I would say that 800 meter advantage is actually pretty nice. It is noticeable. Much more noticeable than the difference between the Changmu and the Fletcher at tier 9, where they both already have way over 12 kilometers of range. So at 11 it starts being noticeable, especially when fighting these tier 10 battleships that you can quite easily land shells upon even at those ranges. Now, the big difference here, of course, between this and the gearing are those deep water torps. But the other difference is the consumables. That's probably what sets these ships apart the most, and that is the consumable usage. The Pan-Asian DD smokes actually remain the same throughout the game. From tier 2 to tier 10, you will have identical smokes across the board. You will have just as many that will last just as long with just as much of a cooldown. They don't scale at all. On the other hand, I mean, this of course means that at low tiers, they are amazing. But once you start reaching tier 10, well, they're still good. The low cooldown and high count makes them extremely useful, but the smoke duration does start to lag behind the gearing significantly. If we do some quick maths here, the three smokes of the gearing provide 130 seconds of smoke. That's a total of 6 minutes and 30 seconds of smoke with those 3 smokes. In comparison, the Yueyang's 5 smokes provide 5 minutes and 50 seconds. So we're already lagging behind 40 seconds in pure smoke duration. Now if you mix in Superintendent, well, the gearing can lay down an amazing 8 minutes and 40 seconds of smoke, whereas the Yueyang can only lay down 7 minutes. So when it comes to smoking up teammates, concealing teammates, the gearing is the absolute king here. That's like what? That's 1 minute and 40 seconds of additional smoke time that the gearing can lay down. And especially for competitive, this is of course a huge, huge advantage. Especially since the gearing smokes last so long. They last 130 seconds each. So you can hide teammates for 2 minutes at a time, and you can do it 4 times. So the smoke differences are, well, I would say heavily, I would say in the advantage of the gearing, but heavily only in the case of teammates. When it comes to smoking yourself, the Yueyang smokes are still, of course, very, very good. Now, at this point, the radar starts becoming a bit more interesting. The radar scales in duration, but not in cooldown or in range, meaning the range is still the pretty anemic 7.5 km radar range, but it lasts 20 seconds. If you slot the radar mode, which you can slot on it, you can reach 28 seconds of radar. The problem is, though, of course, the lack of range. If you really want to use it on someone, usually you have to put yourself in harm's way. I thought I had selected my guns there, by the way. I thought I didn't press the key hard enough on the keyboard, so I thought I was switching to my guns to shoot that guy. Instead, I switched to my torps. I shot my torps into the island. Ignore that ever happened. But regarding the radar, it's very limited use. If you're going to run the radar on the Yueyang, it's almost always going to be in a division. I think if in a division with another DD, it can be quite strong. Because, well, you need someone to smoke you up. Because if you push into a cap and you radar someone, and they leave the smoke and spot you in return, I mean, you're just going to eat as much damage as he's eating as well. So very limited use. And most of the time, if you're playing in a division, that's really the only time I see it being highly useful. For solo play, smokes will almost always be superior. You can make, don't get me wrong, I'm sure someone is gonna, but this one game I saw this guy had an amazing game with the radar, Flamu, what the hell? Yeah, that's one game. And I've tried it as well, and I had good games with radar as well, but they are rare. And the smokes are just significantly more useful. They provide much more utility than this very short range, fairly short duration radar ever will. In divisions, strong and pretty trolly. Solo, go smokes. Every time, just go smokes. Especially, one of the huge weaknesses is if when you run radar and there's a carrier. Oh my lord, that is not fun. Because you don't have defensive AA. So you can't really discourage the carrier from spotting you, and you don't have smokes to hide yourself because you're running radar. So if the carrier decides to hover a plane up on top of you, literally your only option is to sail away to a teammate or hope that your carrier is defending you, which of course relying on teammates in randoms is not an enjoyable experience, because most carriers tend to be more intimate with how their glue bottle tastes than how to actually control their fighters. So running radar when playing solo can be extremely frustrating, and most of the time smokes are the way to go. Now this game ends, and well, 184k damage, not the highest I will expect to see, because once again this is very similar to the gearing. It shares many of the strengths, and the gearing is of course an excellent destroyer. If we look at the team score, I actually had an Omni teammate on my team, so that's why this game felt so smooth and easy, because, well, I had a Battleship player who actually knew what he was doing, and the Battleships of course are extremely powerful when people know what they're doing. Detailed report wise though, significant here is of course the amount of torpedo hits. 107k damage from the torps, and that's something you will be seeing a lot of, landing a lot of these torps, because they are so extremely stealthy and so fast, and at 13.5 km range you can quite easily even hit battleships hiding far back, as you saw me do throughout this game. Battleships hiding in their spawn tended to eat a lot of my torps. The Missouri, the Corfus, the Friedrich Grosse, all of them eating a ton of these torps. Even these German battleships, even when they spot these torps with hydro, they will still have to do a lot of effort to dodge them because, well, 68 knots of speed, and German battleship don't exactly handle well. So this ship has a lot of strengths, and it's a very powerful ship. But is it better than the gearing? Debatable. That's very debatable. The gearing is still the superior team player. For solo play though, the Yueyang can be quite nice. Honestly, for solo play, the Yueyang might hold the advantage. But for team play, the gearing will be more valuable than a single Yueyang. However, if you already have a gearing in your division, adding a Yueyang with radar, for example, probably makes for a pretty damn terrifying duo. Anyway, let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship, as well as showing you guys the difference in how high above the water the gearing sits in comparison to this ship. Now, before I move on and show you guys my recommended build, I did promise you guys to show you the difference in how much hull the Yueyang shows compared to the gearing. This is such a significant difference that I need to draw attention to it. This is of course the Yueyang. Pay attention to how low it sits in the water. And this is the gearing. Yueyang, gearing. Now you can probably quite obviously see just how big of a difference there is between how much hull these ships show. So even though the gearing here might have a 900 HP advantage with survivability expert active, the Yueyang's much lower hull will probably more than make up for that difference, and yeah, I'm pretty sure that the advantage the Yueyang has in survivability is probably significantly larger, even though it has less health, simply because of how low it sits in the water and how much less hull it's showing. Anyway, module wise, well, there's not much to talk about here. It's a tier 10 with no upgrades. Premium consumable wise, smoke, repair, speed boost, in that order. Smokes are so very important on this ship because they are so damn valuable. Of course you can slot radar, but as I mentioned, only if you're in a division. It's not really worth it otherwise. Sure, you can have some good games, don't get me wrong, you can have good games if you get to use a teammate's smoke or whatever, or the perfect opportunity shows up. Radar can always be a very powerful tool, but in 19 times out of 20 the smoke will be much better. Upgrade wise, torpedo and turret survivability, AA range, because none of the others are really worth using, and you really need the AA help on this thing since you can't slot defensive AA. Torpedo reload booster, since the torpedo reload is so long. Propulsion mod, actually propulsion mod 2, and concealment. Now you could run the improved speed boost here. That would honestly be a really valid option for a longer duration speed boost, since you will be stuck running speed boost with no other options, so further enhancing your speed wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. If you don't have an additional speed boost though, just run the propulsion mod 1 like I'm doing here. I should probably try with speed boost. I mean, it should be just perfectly fine, but I've been running the engine survivability since I consider it very valuable as well. Captain perks wise, I am running pretty much my USDD build, which is not surprising considering how similar the tier 8, tier 9 and tier 10 are to the USDD line. Preventive maintenance, followed by last stand, followed by survivability expert, followed by concealment expert. That's the basic 10-point build. Torpedo reload, great for this Benson, Fletcher, this one. They're great for honestly all DDs, and adrenaline rush for even faster reload. So that's the 15-point captain. Now you have 4 points. I like radio location, and if you're going to play Clan Wars, then radio location is obviously the way to go. However, it doesn't mean that it's automatically the best. I mean, there are some options here that you could run if you find yourself eating torps in a smoke a lot, maybe slotting vigilance. Maybe you want more firepower, you could go demolition expert, or you could go for a balance, which is BFT, which is something I've been considering the most. If you give up RPF, since I use RPF a lot to torp DDs that I can't see, and the Yueyang torps can't hit DDs, so it diminishes the value of RPF significantly for random battles. So I've been considering maybe slotting BFD to help with this struggling AA and help with dealing with planes that hover on top of you and so forth, while at the same time giving us 10% reload, which is of course fantastic, and then speccing into priority target as well. So this combination is something I've also been considering. That's not to say that this build I'm running right now is bad. It's still a very, very good build, but in the gearing I find myself often torping towards where RPF is indicating, and doing it in the Yueyang is of course a waste of torpedoes. So not quite as valuable on this ship, and thus I think RPF is something that can be replaced or further tweaked in this build. For Clan Wars, of course, RPF is a must-have, no discussion there. Signal-wise, I mean, you want speed, you want Juliet Charlie to prevent the detonations, and you want faster consumable cooldown. Other than that, AA is nice, increased fire chance is nice, but they aren't necessarily must-have, they are just bonuses. Other than that, XP and money flags is probably the way to go. Anyway, let me show you guys the premium camo. 1 second, there we go. That's the premium. That is the premium tier 10 camo. It looks, I mean, I guess it looks okay. Not very special, not very memorable, but I guess it looks pretty nice. Anyway, that was my Yueyang commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys later.